Greetings, booktubers, and welcome to Sunday Comics. Greetings, booktubers. Welcome back to Grammaticus Books. Welcome to Sunday Comics. We got a Sunday Comics edition for you here today, where we're going to talk about the one comic book that saved Marvel Comics from financial ruin. And that comic book is Star Wars. Star Wars by George Lucas. This is issue number 1 from April 12th of 1977. That's when this issue debuted. This is my very beat up copy here of issue number 1 of Star Wars. And this is the comic book that saved Marvel Comics from financial ruin. Jim Shooter, the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, famously states, Star Wars saved Marvel. And it did. Allow me to set the scene. It's 1977. That's the year. And the Marvel Comics books industry, the industry in general, the whole comic book industry in general, has been in decline since 1960. Since 1960 all the way up to 1977, no issue, no title by any comic book publisher has been able to crack 1 million units in sales, not since 1960. Prior to 1960, or 1960 and prior, I should say, you would routinely have comic book titles that would crack 1 million units in sales on their monthly publications. And those were typically Mad Magazine. Archie was very popular, which amazes me. Millie the Model was a huge one. And then, of course, you had the heavyweights in the superhero field, which was Superman and Batman over at DC. But Marvel has an additional problem on top of this slide in general sales, this trend that's been going on since 1960. And their problem is that in 1970, Jack Kirby leaves Marvel Comics and goes over to their arch rival DC Comics. And as soon as Jack Kirby left Marvel Comics, every title that he worked on, Fantastic Four, Captain America, suffered an immediate drop in sales per month of between 35,000 units and 55,000 units. So that by 1977, Marvel Comics is in serious financial distress. Now, all these units that I'm throwing out here, these sales figures, are based upon the annual statements of ownership and circulation that the publishers were required to file with the post office. And they're required to file those on a monthly basis, and they track sales at the newsstands, comic book shops, and their subscription circulations that were mailed out through the mail. So that's where those figures are coming from. So 1977 comes around. Marvel publishes this one here in April 12th of 1977, and issue number 1 immediately sells over 1 million units of this comic book. And what's amazing about that is because April 12th predates the movie release by over a month. So the movie hasn't even come out yet, and this comic book sells over 1 million units on the sales stands. Because the movie comes out on May 25th of 1977, and it's a limited release on May 25th of 1977. But immediately it's apparent to all the people in the movie industry they've got a mega hit on their hands, and they immediately expand out to as many theaters as they can get. And then issues 1, 2, and 3 here of Star Wars all sell over 1 million units of sales per month, and they save Marvel's financial bacon. In 1977, Marvel is publishing 16 titles per month. And of those 16 titles, none of them are cracking over 300,000 units of sales. And 300,000 is the top. So when Star Wars comes along and does 1 million units of sales, is accounting for almost 25% of Marvel's total sales, because most of their comics are selling in about the 150,000 unit range. So this one really is driving Marvel Comics sales here through 1977 and 1978. The series here went from 1977 to 1986, and it had 107 issues that were done in it total. They rebooted it in 2015, and interestingly enough, when Marvel reboots Star Wars in 2015, the very first issue cracks 1 million units in sales again. So Star Wars has super selling power here in the comic book industry, and it absolutely pulled Marvel's chestnuts out of the fire. But what about the comic book itself? The comic book itself, it's written by Roy Thomas. It's an adaptation by the legend Roy Thomas, and the artwork is by Howard Chaykin. Now, because it's before the movie release, Roy Thomas had to write this based off of George Lucas's screenplay. And I wonder if they didn't give Marvel Comics a sneak preview of the movie in order to get the look and the feel here just correct for release with the movie, because it looks really good. All the characters look exactly like they do in the movie. They obviously had either the storyboards or they got a sneak peek at the movie. And Howard Chaykin does a pretty good job with his pencils. Howard Chaykin is most famous for his work on American Flag in the 1980s, which he wrote and produced and did all the artwork for. And he's most famous as a guy who was very good at doing panel layouts and panel arrangements. He studied under Gil Kane, Wally Wood, and Neil Adams. And that's quite the pedigree. That's quite the people, the legends teaching you here. And he considers Gil Kane to be the person who mainly taught him the ropes of the comic book industry. And you can see a lot of Gil Kane's influence in here. But what I see as the biggest influence whenever I look at Howard Chaykin's work is I see newspaper fashion ads. When you look at his postures that he uses when he draws his figures, when you look at his proportions on his figures, and you look at the style of their clothing and their expressions and how he draws the faces and the hair, I absolutely see a heavy influence from the newspaper fashion ad circulations that used to go out in those newspapers back in the 1970s. But let's take a look at his work. Here you've got the opening scene with the Star Destroyer and Darth Vader coming on board of the ship in order to try to take possession of the droids in that famous scene. And Howard Chaykin is doing a pretty competent job. The colors really pop out here because you're using the 4-color coloring process, where they use magenta, cyan, and yellow and black in order to create up to 64 shades of colors. But there was a heavy emphasis then on primary colors and blacks and dark blues that really make these colors in the 1970 comic books pop out quite a bit. So here's another page on it. And Chaykin's work on it is competent, but it seems a bit cramped on these panels and these pages. It seems like he's trying to compress in quite a bit into each of his panels in his story, which is why when 2 weeks ago, when I saw this on the counter behind a used bookstore, it is the Marvel Special Edition #1 that compiles reprints issues 1 through 3 of Star Wars from 1977, and the Marvel Treasure Edition format, which is 14 inches high by 10 inches across. So when you open it up, you get a 20-inch spread. And it does wonders for Chaykin's work. It just opens it up, it lets it breathe, and you can really appreciate his panel layouts and his panel designs much better in this. I think it works wonders on it. And I have a number of other Marvel Treasure Editions. I've done a video on Marvel Treasure Editions, and that's not the case with the other ones. Well, I've got reprints of Spider-Man, of the Fantastic Four, and Conan the Barbarian. And those reprints where they blow them up, they just look like blown up larger issues of the original comics. But with this one here, I think it just looks great. For some reason, the large format, combined with Howard Chaykin's pencils, combined with the 4-step coloring process that Marvel was using, just makes for something special here in this Marvel Special Edition #1, which is issues 1 through 3. And suddenly, it looks really good. Really good stuff. And let me get you some other splash pages on here. Here's the famous shootout with Greedo in the bar on Tatooine. And then you have the Millennium Falcon escaping as they take Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker off on their adventure. And then you guys get a nice little psychedelic splash page over here with the Millennium Falcon. And it looks really good. And that's really surprising with Howard Chaykin, because Howard Chaykin is notorious for not being able to draw vehicles well. He really was horrible at drawing vehicles. He was bad at drawing anything that was technologically related. So he's a really interesting choice here to pick as the artist for Star Wars. But in 1977, this is his first run. This is his first major run on a comic book of any type. He's been working in the field since 1970, but this is his first big shot. And he does a very good job with it, surprisingly, especially with the starships and with all the technology that was required to draw. And here you get a a little back pinup poster on the back of this Marvel special edition as well. But that's it. That is the Star Wars 1 through 3 and the Star Wars Marvel Treasure Edition, Star Wars #1, and the comic book that saved Marvel Comics from financial ruin. Without this comic book right here, you may not have a Marvel comic book industry right now. You might not have all of the Marvel comic book movies. It might be something else completely different if it wasn't for this comic book right here and George Lucas and his wonderful movie and the fantastic adaptation here by Roy Thomas with Howard Chaykin doing the pencils and all the great colors. But that's it. I'm going to wrap this one up, and I'm going to say take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you guys when I catch you.